Good morning. Today is Saturday, May 9, 2009. My name is Alejandra Mendoza and I'm with José Orraca to have a conversation about treatment practices in photograph conservation. This is part of a series of interviews I'm conducting to photograph conservators as part of my project for the Advanced Residency program, in which I intend to investigate and describe the current state of treatment practices in the field. I would like to follow a format for this interview in which I will begin asking you questions about your experience and the work you perform, follow up by some questions addressing specific treatment topics, to end up with some questions about training and education and the future challenges of the field in this subject. So I would like to begin asking you, could you please tell me your name, your job title and affiliation?
José Hipólito Orraca.
And could you tell me a little bit about your professional career, about the lab you have had?
You see, I started college in the South, and first I went to law school, and then I went to seminary, and then when I got married, then I moved east, and happened to be in Washington, where I got a job at the Library of Congress. This is about the time that the Florence floods and the library started advertising for jobs, for apprentices. So I became an apprentice in paper conservation. When Marilyn Widener started coming down and giving talks and things on paper conservation. And one of my jobs was to treat 500 photographs a week in the most incredible, embarrassing ways. It meant that we would put them in these big trays, all of them together. No matter, we never knew what they were. I didn't know what those photographs were about. Many of them dissolved. And then we would put them through this machine called a Portland machine, which is an animal glue machine. And what you do is that you put it, there's this round wheel that picks up heated glue, animal glue, from a vat underneath, picks it up and transfers it to the back of the photograph. If that glue becomes very dry, then the photograph sticks to that, and then the pins make it into confetti. And that happened many times. After a while, I just said, this just cannot be. This just cannot be. And it was at that time that
This was in the late 60s?
Late 60s. Yeah, 68, something. At the time was when I asked the Library of Congress to send me to RIT to do research and develop the techniques, seminal, the first techniques in the conservation. Up to that time, conservation of photographs meant really copying them, and often throwing away the original. I mean, that's what Kodak advertised. A man named Walter Clark, who also was at the Israel, that was his recommendation. And so, anyway, I stayed there in RIT first about almost a whole summer. Took a very interesting, very good course they had for people who were transferred, which gave you all the basic information on science and so on. And then they wanted me to go back to. I didn't want to go, so I called my friend. Is this important?
Yes, of course.
Okay. I called my friend Caroline Keck, which is a renowned painting conservator in Cooperstown. Because she was the one who had said, you should get them to go take you to RIT. So anyway, I said, I can't go. I'm just now developing techniques. I'm just now, doing the seminal research. Incidentally, Gary has the original paper that I wrote on all the ways that I tried developing photographs as a way of testing.
Okay.
They want to reprint it into a. But anyway, so then Georgia keeps calling and says, "How much money you need?" And then I stayed on for a while, and then I was made the person who would take care of the sticker collection, and I would go from museum, make sure that they were keeping the criteria
That she wrote.
that she wrote. Have you ever looked at the book?
Yep.
That's very interesting. As a matter of fact, by that time, shortly after that, I quit the Eastman House. I just couldn't take it. I just couldn't take the place anymore. We had a director named Doherty. Mr. Doherty loved Coke. As a matter of fact, he had a Coke machine in his office. And he would put he would put photographs to look at, Coke on top of them. Coke would spill all over the photographs, and then I had to conserve it. I said, I'm not going to conserve it anymore. You spill it, you conserve it. And he became so angry at me. So anyway, then Caroline Cake asked me, the following year they didn't have anyone to teach paper and photographs.
In Cooperstown?
In Cooperstown. And so Caroline Cake asked me to come for 1 year so that I could prepare myself to then go to Delaware.
Can I interrupt you for a second? Just before going on, this relationship between Caroline Keck and George O'Keeffe was a personal relationship, or do you know a little bit more about how
she was her conservator.
Of paintings, of her paintings.
Yeah. But they were very good friends. Have you ever seen the book? There's a very interesting book.
I will.
There's a very interesting book of all this correspondence between Caroline and Georgia about what they should do with the painting and the
So when you were asked to come back to Library of Congress, she called Georgia O'Keeffe.
Exactly.
But you hadn't met her before.
I had never met her. I didn't meet her till later.
Okay.
But I corresponded regularly with her. And, but by that time, of course, I had set up the program. I, in essence, became the first conservator of photographs almost in the world, in the world, yes. And so so by that time, I left it all set up, the criteria and so forth, and then I left. I went down there. I stayed in Cooperstown for a year. It was a beautiful little town. Have you ever been to Cooperstown?
No.
Beautiful little town. And Caroline wanted me to stay longer. But she had already committed me to Delaware. And I just couldn't say to these people, I can't go now. Because that was going to be a program only about photographs. Up there I was teaching both photographs and paper. And so therefore I went on there.
And you stayed there?
Till 80 something. I stayed there for 5 years.
Okay. It's from 74, 5?
It was from 74, I think more like 75. It was a very good time. Of course, that's when, the first student that I had was a young lady named Chris King. She had been there already in paper conservation, but she and Clapp, does that mean anything? Couldn't get along, so Clark and Clapp asked me to take her. But I wasn't ready, I didn't even have a studio. All of that really created an unfortunate bad feelings between Chris and I. She also damaged a photograph that belonged to one of the professors. She washed it and she lost the signature very Westy. and the university has to replace, pay Dr. Craven for this photograph. So anyway, then came the period in which I had Gary, Debbie, Valerie Baz, Lois Olcott Price, Teresa Fairbanks, all these were students in one tiny, tiny space. I don't know if you've ever been to the university, but you know the steps that go up to the second floor, the big steps? Underneath there was a place that was dirt floor when I got there, but they fixed it up. It was tiny, but there were lots of room everywhere else, but professors get very possessive of space, I mean, there was one room that was at least as big as this I could have used, which as a matter of fact, I think is what Debbie uses now. Okay. So it was cute. It was cute. Gary had already finished his paper, and he was already somewhere else. And so he came because he liked photographs. That is one of the interesting things. Gary, in particular, is a person who loves photographs. From the graduate programs, not always do I get people who love photographs. They love to play with photographs, but not love photographs. And I would put him underneath the microscope, on the microscope. I says, look at the photograph. I said, that at that moment, when that picture was taken, that person was there, and that arm was like this. I mean, there's an objective reality to a photograph that to me is very moving. It's history really in its most profound way. And so anyway, so I stayed there. When the space business became unbearable, I stayed there 1 more year, and then I decided to quit, and then I got a job in Milwaukee at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee for 1 year to study the photographs of Timothy O'Sullivan, and that was very interesting. And that ended.
Were you doing conservation as well?
No, just conversation. Which leads me to say this, it's probably out of sequence here, but one of the things that has always made my profession has been connoisseursship. In other words, unless you know what a photograph is like, or what was the period in which that was taken, or the artistic history of that photo, you got to know so much more than the science of it. In order to make right decisions that are ethical, and you can do it. I used to publish. Have you seen my little newsletter? It was strictly to connoisseurship, and it was just. Often people say to me, "Why don't you publish anything?" But publishing is a lot of work. So anyway, that's basically the essence of my teaching. And I used to have people like Grant or Jim Riley or other people to come and teach the students how to make albumin prints, how to make platinum prints, and they would make them. And then I had another course in the art history department, which was on the history, technical history, and another one on the artistic and aesthetics. In other words, that was my best course, the aesthetics. I'll never forget that one day my wife and I went to a restaurant in Wilmington, and there was somebody came with a bottle of wine. I says, this young lady is giving to you, and I couldn't remember who she was. She was one of my students, and she gave me, she says, that was the best course I've ever taken. Because I had technical teaching, which was excellent. At the beginning of the semester, this is going beyond what you probably want to hear, but it's important.
Yes.
At the beginning of the semester, I would make a photocopy of a particular photograph, pass them around different countries. And I said, next week, bring me a photograph that is a sequence to that photograph. Either way, the way the figures are placed, it could be any number of times. And the aspects of aesthetics grows on you. You also learn how to hang a show. Sequencing is just terrific. So anyway, that was I'm sorry to say that in the years intervening, that the students in the graduate programs have not learned more of that. All of that business, well, it's still there to a certain extent, but nothing like what, in terms of teaching techniques and that kind of things, nothing like what I used to really do.
And were your students only for the conservation program, or were they also?
I was both. I was an associate professor in both departments.
Both conservation and art?
And art history. Yeah. And a lot of my students were students, apart from conservation, with students who became curators of photography.
Would you remember some of the names? No.
Boy, I'll tell you.
I'm just curious.
I probably will all the time think about it. I had 5 good students in that group that have become the beginning curators. And I was glad I did that.
So to continue in your professional career, you went to Milwaukee?
I went to Milwaukee, and then I came back to Delaware. I was thinking maybe I should go stay there. But then I decided I want to go to New York and open my conservation studio, because what I like to do, I love teaching, and I'm a very good teacher, but what I like to do is conservation, treatment, because that's where you learn. That's why, you do one treatment 3 times, and my God, you learn a world of information that you never even thought. I don't know if you ever met Betty Fisk. Betty Fisk was one of the students there. As a matter of fact, she was one of my minor students. And she could not continue. She eventually became a paper conservator at Winterthur. But she could not continue photography because she says, I want to know what you're going to do and what's going to happen when I do it. I said, what the hell do I know? There's albumin photographs come in so many manifestations. The colors are different. You have a diluted albumin, you have a mixed media, and of course that's what makes photography conservation to me exciting. But she just couldn't deal with that, and actually this relates to one of your questions, is that students who cannot deal with failure, in my view, can never make it in conservation. That young lady who cut that photograph, she wanted to leave that moment. I said, no, you don't want to leave. If you leave right now, says I'll report you to the ASE Ethics Committee, because you're going to finish this object and you're going to do the best you can. I said, and you may not leave my lab until you do it. And I says, I would suggest that you go out and take a walk.
Clear your head.
Yeah, you know, I used to do that in New York. I used to go to Central Park. Sometimes I would just do a terrible mistake. And you know, Bob Futernick, a good friend of mine, wanted to write a column about what treatments didn't work. You know what I mean? I think it'd be excellent because you learn as much from what does work, works as it doesn't work. But ultimately, you have to go back. You have to go back, or you're not worth your soul. I cannot live with that guilt that I did not try to do something, and often I can resolve the problem. I can't remember one time that I did not. Oh, one time I did. I just remember. I had a group of photographs of Queen Victoria. It was from an album, and I didn't realize they were carbon prints, and they needed to be unmounted from this album and put it because the pages were very, very good. And I put them in water, and they just became like floating waves like that. And I said, you know, I need to let them dry. But I couldn't, you could not put it on top of a surface. You have to sort of hang it.
It would stick.
Yeah. You have to sort of hang it. And when I hung it, it came like this, you know, like, I don't know how to explain it, but it was so something was just wavy along. Luckily, I was able to take him out and coach him into coming back together, and then they shrank to the stage. But I have kept one photograph that I did that just for my son. But it was, you know, again, you know, I would have felt terrible if I could not resolve that. Anyway.
So we're now in your practice in New York. You established there a lab.
Then stay 1 year. I knew I wanted to go to New York, and of course the world didn't know. In the world of government, they didn't know what the hell I was doing. So I started collecting unemployment for 1 full year while I set up my practice. And I went to New York and I rented an apartment on 68th Street. And I established my business little by little. And then it just completely took off. I was treating as many as 400 to 500 photographs a year. That's how many I was in. Because I was the only conservator.
This is in the 80s?
This is in the 80s, early 80s. I would say till about 85. Well, I moved my business up here in 91. And at that time, actually, it was in Kent a little time. And I had a little tiny space. It was basically a studio apartment. One room that was like 25 by 25 inches. And we had lots of tables up there. And I had lots of people working for me. I mean, it was incredible to believe I had as many as 5 or 6, and then on top of that, interns.
So 6 conservators and then some interns?
Well, people that I would train, there's a guy named Marion Hunter, there was Carol Turchin, Paul was there, Freddie Perez, a guy from the Dominican Republic. All of those came there, plus individual students that would come from one of the programs for, let's say, a summer or that kind of thing. was really proud. We had a good time. We had a good time. Paul, Paul was funny because Paul is in many ways so gullible. You know, the lights. One day, the lights kept going off. You know, the fuses kept going down, and he would go he had to go all the way downstairs and
Change.
And so he did, and we knew that the lights would work. But as we heard him come up the steps, and Marion and I were in the home, he says, "Paul, what happened? We still have no lights." And he had to go back downstairs. Then Paul and I kept pushing each other and hitting their hands like that. He had to be, he needed training, this is the problem. He needed to be raised by a parent who was really tough on him. But his mother spoiled him. And anyway, we had a good time, Marion and I and Paul and Debbie. Debbie came for a time. And actually that's interesting, the last year that or the year before that, that's when I got the idea about the workshops. As soon as I moved here, in that year I had my first workshop in Kent.
In
Kent.
fall.
Huh?
The workshops you were having annually in September?
Yeah. September, sometimes October.
In fall.
At that time, AIC was meeting, let's see, like, I think in June or something. And we established that now AIC has changed. And they have it like in March or April or whatever. So anyway, we stayed there till 91. And the primary reason that I moved up here was we still had a little cottage, which was essentially from where that wall ends over there, that what is now our bedroom. And stay there, and then I would, go down to town for that. I was so spoiled by that space that's where I made my mistake, because it was so huge compared to what I had in New York. That by the time I came here, I thought I had to have the same thing. Very terrible mistake. The students would come, we would all choose topics. And one of the things that I emphasize is that there is not going to be any ill feelings. I always would write to the students and I would say, and sometimes we had as many as 20 or 30 students. I wrote to them and I said, in the way to Kent on Route 7, there's a place that's called Boone's Bridge, and there's a bridge there that George Washington crossed over. And I says, when you pass by there, get on that bridge and spit out all your bad feelings. Do not bring them into Kent.
Take the river.
Yes. Leave it all to George Washington. But we had such good times. I mean, because, when you get that many people, we had one that is one of our best friends, Krista Hoffman from Austria. We had people from France that would come. And it was exciting. I just loved it.
And the topics of the workshops were on treatment or?
Always treatment. Always treatment. Yeah, it would be. I still have the books of we would develop a notebook with all the, I would assign copies, topics for them to do. I said, you cannot come unless you're willing to give a talk. And so everybody would have something to do, Like for example, one of my students at that time, Anna Huffman, who is not now in conservation, I had developed a technique of flattening prints. Albumin prints in particular become very wrinkled, and no matter what you do, it doesn't get them flat. And what I would do is I would dehumidify. I would humidify, between blotters, and then I would put them in the press, the seal mounting press, changing every 3 seconds, and you would not believe how flat and how wonderful they look. In Paul's research, Paul said that all the photographs change when they get into water, that they became kind of wrinkled and you could feel little. But what he never said is that a lot of the photographs were put in presses to be mounted, heavy presses. So much so that you can see the impression of the photograph on the mount.
Like burnisher.
Yeah, exactly. So I replicated that in my work. But not always do I mount, That's one. At one time, it's amazing how you change your techniques and what you do with time. There was a time in which there was a standard film. You would unmount a photograph either by putting them in water or with a spatula, remove them. Now when you do it with a spatula, the old metal spatula, you can see the ridges formed by that. Or you can, you can put them. You could put them in water and sometimes in salt. It would vary. But at that time, we did everything we did. Even a photograph that came to your mounted, we would mount it. Just because we felt that it was a great mistake I made with IJ photographs. Because many IJ photographs that came into the collection of Museum of Art came unmounted. But, I've seen them put into frames in which they put them unmounted and of course they curl up, And photographs then become 3-dimensional objects instead of 2-dimensional objects, which is what they're supposed to be, 2-dimensional. And they lose a sense of objective reality when they are not flat. That depth interferes with your vision. And then we often, in the case of our viewing prints, refixed and rewashed. Because much of the fading that I saw was caused by not processing properly. So I did that. And actually, to this day, I see photographs that we did that to. Like, for example, that big panorama. And still, nothing has happened. They don't do it. But, I guess ultimately I think is that we did a technique that was, it was too, we did it and we did it again and we did it again and we did it again. For a time I used to line doing things with Japanese paper. Now that had a great advantage to it. But it is amazing to me in conservation how one feels one field of conservation affects another. We have been, in some ways, damaged by the influence of painting conservation in our field. Because we talk about in-painting. How in the hell do you in-paint a little crack? You can't. You can't. There's no way, you know. And then we always use the brush. But lately I've been experimenting more with airbrushing. Because you see, when you in-paint with a brush, what you develop is an area that is not a continuous image. You know, it's an image that wherever the brush mark is, stops. Then, and the same thing happened then later with lining, which is a paper conservation technique. As a matter of fact,
do you remember when this was introduced in photograph conservation? This lining, was it?
When I did that, I think I was still in New York. It had the advantage, which I later helped by flattening the print, that it would flatten the prints. But it also had the great advantage that you could mount that print without putting it in water. Because the Japanese paper kind of separates, and you just put a little spatula and you lift it up, it comes right up. And there's enough of the fibers left there, but then, see, the lining was just an intermediate state. Then we always did dry mounting. I mean, those are, as I said, things that we did without even thinking that there was any other alternatives until something occurred to me, and I guess, you know, when I think, alhamdulillah, my contributions to the field, one of my major contributions has been that I'm always willing to move into a new technique to find answers, you know. I spent hours reading from Kirk Ottman, Encyclopedia of Chemistry. If I have a problem with a pigment or something, Kirk Ottman is an excellent encyclopedia. I just cannot imagine a conservator who doesn't have one. Only until recently did I find out that Paul did not even know what Kirk Ottman was. I said, Paul, how could you be doing conservation at that point? Because that's where all the answers are, you know. So anyway, I was always willing to experiment. I mean, I've done so many different kinds of experiments. And it comes from the power of connoisseurship and observation. For example, this is a very minor thing. I've always made paste. At one time I used to make huge amounts of paste because we would cook it, but now I do it mostly in microwave, so I can do a container, very tight container. But I found that even in the refrigerator, it will start to age and become thin. But for some reason, one day I have a little container, the glass container, which is a middle blue, not a dark blue or light blue. I leave it out and it never goes bad. The adhesion never goes bad. There is something in the filter created by that blue that is keeping. Isn't that amazing? I still haven't discovered what it is, but the observation tells me, but I am going to find out. The same thing with intensification. The way intensification came about. And people think that it had anything to do with that guy in Canada. It had nothing to do with it. I didn't even know about it. what happened was that one of my students who is now in California, Bob Aitchison, when he was a student, I was lecturing at the museum, and we were just experimenting with some junky album prints, prints that were reproductions of art and like that. And this one had some stains, and I said, let's just for the sake of it, so you will see what happens, bleach. And then we knew immediately what would happen to that. And as that happened, I said, ooh, we better pick up this bleach, but we gotta stabilize it. Why don't we use sodium borohydride? All of a sudden, I put it in borohydride, and this thing print came back completely. It intensified because it reduced the silver again. And so, for many years, I thought that was funny. It just couldn't happen. So one day when I was in New York, this client of mine, John Blair, brought me this print. It's this size of a tree, and it was a salted print. And she said, "Can't you do anything? Because it was totally fake." And it was a beautiful image. And I said, well, let me try to deposit so that didn't work. I tried all these techniques and that didn't work. It was just amazing that the print made it through all of that. And then I remember what happened with Bob Aitchison. And I had some borohydride, and we put it there. My God, I thought I would faint when I saw that print, looking as it still does. She still has it in her apartment. It's absolutely gorgeous. None of the prints that I know of, or the ones that I have in my collection that I've anticipated, have ever gotten again. But you can remove it. You can refix it and you take it out, and then you can bleach it again. I mean, you can intensify it again. You can do that 2 or 3 times.
Have you done that?
Oh yeah, many times. Sometimes a print doesn't need. It doesn't need intensification. It needs a stain to be removed. And many conservators use it as a bleaching agent. And so I remember I had a little agreement card that we see, which had a big brown stain. I put it in there, took the brown stain, but it also made the image. I then put it in borohydride, and the print came back beautiful, but it did not the stain did not return because it was not certain.
So you bleached it and then
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was just amazing. And those are really, really exciting times.
When was this that you discovered?
Let's see.
process?
I would say that the time when Aitchison was working with that print must have been like 76, 77. It was like 82 when I did that tree. And it was like 83 when I did a Marville print that used to belong to a client of mine, a friend of mine named Klotz, which became the source of all that controversy. Because what happened is that Alan Klotz sold it to someone. The photograph had come from London, and this person, what's his name? Ian Moore. Ian Moore had seen it, and of course it was not sold. Alan Clark bought it for very little money. And he brought it to me and I intensified it. It looked beautiful. So then, stupid of him, he went back to London and sold it. And all these people see it. And it's sitting in Congress and all of this. Actually, if it wasn't that Ian Moore is such a stupid SOB, he could have really gotten back at me because really I was just working on the dog. So anyway, it was at that time that he started writing in the Congress. And there's an article in a journal called Avenue Magazine. Did you ever read that journal?
Which one?
Avenue Magazine. Starko, what you do with that article on Avenue Magazine that you found the other day?
I kept it somewhere here.
Anyway, we have copies.
I think I've seen an abstract, but I don't have the original. Okay.
So anyway, it was
About the
a great part about me, but a great part about the intensification and the controversy that ensued. And then all the dealers got very upset with me. And I said, they wanted me to mark this photograph in some way that would say that I got intensified.
like inspired or?
Yeah. And I said, I can't do that. I'll be altering the object. I'll be putting something that was not there. I said, all you have to do is anytime that I do an intensification from you, turn that report in with the photograph that you sell. But they didn't want to do that, see? So they wanted me to lay all the blame on me and not on themselves. I said, you cowards. I said, you can't, I'm not going to be your running boy, in all these issues. Alejandro, one comes to a stage in conservation when you spend all these years and you've developed a reputation that you don't give a damn what they say. You just don't. Because all of these dealers have their interest at heart. They don't have art at heart. They have money at heart, and I cannot deal with that. So.
Let me ask you something about intensification. What is your justification on the treatment? What do you see in a photograph, and then what's the process until you decide you will intensify it? What's the deterioration? You as a conservator, what are your aim towards that treatment?
That's difficult. That's a visual kind of thing. In the first place, I always tell the viewers that it is my choice whether it's going to be conserved or not. I mean, intensified or not. It's not their choice, it's my choice. Because often they want to look at photograph, they want a photograph that looks perfect beyond what it needs to. All that I want to do is to be able to read the image. So that's one choice that I made. And then when I start a treatment, it's kind of interesting because the only carbohydrate that I had came in these little pills.
Yes.
So I measure everything by pills. One pill would do this, 2 pills would do that. And I remember Barbara Lemon, when she was with me, she decided to take a bottle of those pills and weigh them each to find out how much in one pill. So it's the same thing with balanced alkaline. You know, I use balanced alkali to reduce the stain before I bleach it, just to aid in the bleaching, so you don't have to do as much chemical, meaning chlorine bleaching in the days when we did chlorine. And I said to them, I have this beaker, this stainless steel beaker that in the bottom it has these raised lines like this. And I said, I just pour enough so that it just barely covers those lines. And Barbara spent so much time trying to measure how much I made. And I said, Barbara, you know, this is only to a certain extent the science. It's more cooking than anything else. It's never cooking. I've always told Debbie, you'll make an excellent monsieur, but you'll never make a good conservator because you don't know how to cook. Oh my. So anyway.
You were saying about the intensification?
Yeah. So then I started with one pill, and that would achieve to a certain extent. Most of the time, one of those pills in 500 milliliters of water will do it. You know, but often, you know, a photograph in which you cannot even see detail, it doesn't do it. And also, my time was usually determined by two things. One way is that I would always, before I started to choose an area of highlight, an area of midtones, and an area of shadows. And I kept looking at those areas as I'm intensifying to see what changes were having place. See what I mean? And if I got to where I could see some detail in the highlights, but I was not blocking the shadows, then to me that was right. And so that's, you know, it's not a treatment that you leave it there and you go, although I'll take your hat. So anyway, usually 2 to 3 minutes at the most would do it, but sometimes it doesn't, you know. But last year, I had a photograph, but that kind of photographs that I could tell you people give me. I had a number of dealers, including my friend Alan Claus, who thought they could do conservation themselves in the backpack. And he had a Curtis of 3 chiefs standing by a water pool, and he put them in cars because he thought that it was a platinum print. And you see, that's a very mistaken idea that those prints they're not platinum, they're silver prints. So when he would get to me, he said, yeah, you do something with it. You do something. So I had it there for a long time because I didn't use it just to show myself. And just about 2 years, no, less than a year, I decided to put it, but it was so far gone that it was just a I left it there for 2 days in the solution. And finally, it came back completely. So much so that I sold it for $1,500 at the auction house. I mean, you could tell the color was. Oh, that's the other thing that happens with intensification. Not only do you get intensification, but you get the original color. You know how albumin changes colors according to how much the processing. You know? Well, it comes back to that color. It doesn't come back to where they all look the same. It comes back to it, which is a great thing. You know, as a matter of fact, I have a print downstairs that just this week I showed it to you at the lunch. That just recently I intensified. And it's beautiful, just absolutely gorgeous. and it'd be a print that I already offered to the National Gallery. So,
As part of your.
no, this is for them to buy. These are to buy. It's a Charles Aubrey print of a natural a nature study. But some of my students feel very uncomfortable with. I said to them, you know, if you feel uncomfortable, don't do it, because you will surely make a mistake. The other thing too is that for a long time, Valerie Vaz kept criticizing my intensification. She says it doesn't work like Jose said. So the time that I had the workshop in which I demonstrated intensification, I was using one step that she didn't know that I was using, and that is that I mix sodium bisulfite into the solution, equal parts to the amount of borohydride. You see what I mean? And I don't know what it does, but what it does, what the effect is, that the print doesn't become fogged. Often intensification can be fogged, like it's too much, and it doesn't become fogged. However, one of the biggest drawbacks in intensification is that if you don't first put it in balanced alkali and de-acidify the print, when you put that print in a borohydride, and it happens the same thing in paper, it bubbles. Creates tiny little bubbles. I have some things downstairs that are here, I think that have bubble. And that's because the acidity creates a shock, And the same thing happens with the paper print, the paper object. If you don't de-acidify before you do the use, in their case, borohydride is used for anti-clog, that's what for an anti-clog.
So there's an intermediate step before this?
I do first a balanced alkali. And that's why I was telling you how do I measure balanced alkali. I think what Barbara is about remember is 0.2% or something. That is my word. I don't pay attention to that kind of things. So anyway, after that, when you wash it, you must wash it. You must wash it. I would say 3 washes, 5 minutes in between. Change the water. I don't put it in one of those running things because it can the emulsion is kind of tender and you can damage it. And then I never put the print in the solution, but the solution over the print. I put the print on the tray and then pour the solution on top. And the reason that gives you much more even is because when a print, if you put the print into a solution, it never achieves, even intensification. Because you're pressing down the print, so it'll get all wet, or all saturated, and different areas. So I never do that. And then I go to intensification to what I judge to be right, and then I take it out. Sometimes I take it out and I wash it and think to myself, this is not right, and I'll do some more. Or maybe I've gone too far and then I use a fixer. I use always rapid fixer. You cannot use rapid fixer, however, in a salted print. You cannot. you remove too much, and there's no print left.
There's no way back.
No.
Jose, we're very close to 1 hour, so
Okay, that's fine.